In the name of God, who doesn't always follow our rules. Lately, I've been thinking a lot about staying in one's lane. We get a lot of messages from society, perhaps from our families, even from the church, about staying in our lanes. We have rules about who can and cannot do certain jobs. And beyond the written rules, a lot more expectations. Society assigns each of us roles and scope and expects us to stick to them, to stay in our lane. The fact is that some of the role expectations are necessary for groups, for society to function. If we all showed up on Sunday morning intending to play the piano, and no one came prepared to preach, or preside, or run the nursery, or with food for coffee hour, it would be a mess. But lanes also keep people silent when society doesn't want to hear something it really needs to hear. Today's reading from the prophet Amos in the Hebrew Scriptures breaks all of those expectations. The prophet Amos is a sheep breeder from Tekoa, a cattle herder, a tender of sycamore fruit, not a professional prophet. He comes from a rural place, not the city where the powerful and important people live. A hit from a wide spot in the road downstate, not a lakefront condo on the loop. And yet, somehow, he has connected with God and communicates God's message in sophisticated, ecstatic poetry that cuts like a knife to the bone. God is not happy with how the rich and powerful are running things. And Amos explains why and how in splendid detail. Amos says, "For 3 trespasses of Damascus, and for 4, I will not turn back." The Hebrew word pesha'im, daintily translated here as trespasses, really means something more like atrocities or crimes against humanity. He goes on to recite the 3 + 4 atrocities of every place in the Israel-Judah world at the time. What are these atrocities? They are not about believing the wrong thing or saying the wrong thing, but rather how people with power treat those without power. Hear this, who trample on the needy, destroying the poor of the land. Amos recites in detail how the powerful cheat, swindle, and take advantage of ordinary people. He lists all of the injustices in today's reading and what God intends to do about it. And it isn't pretty. It's quite a thing for a working-class guy from Nowheresville to tell the king and the professional prophet that God has had quite enough in beautiful, sophisticated poetry. Amos is most definitely not staying in his lane. In our reading from the Gospel of Luke, we hear the story of Martha and Mary. And in this story, Mary steps out of her lane. I've always found this story puzzling, even troubling, because Jesus seems to reprehend Martha for being too busy with the extensive work of hospitality. It hits close to home for me, because I'm often as not the person in the kitchen seeing to the many details of making sure everyone gets to eat. It stings to hear that I haven't chosen the excellent part. And personally, a world of no Marthas, of DoorDash every day and dirty dishes in the sink overnight seems pretty dreadful to this Martha. I don't think that is Jesus' point at all. The point is that in the God Project, there are roles which transcend lanes that are for everyone. And Mary has figured that out. By the expectations of the time, Mary was way out of her line. She was expected to tend to the work of hospitality, while the men engaged in religious study. At the time that this gospel was written, there were house churches that were hosted and led by women. It is consistent with the overall portrait of Jesus in this gospel to endorse this, for Jesus to break society's expectations about staying in one's lane. It is everyone's lane to listen to study the teaching of Jesus, and to exercise leadership. Jesus in the Gospel of Luke doesn't stay in his lane, and his refusal to stay in his lane is central to the picture Luke paints of him. He is alone with women who are not his relatives. He allows women to serve him. He teaches a woman in her own home. All of these things were absolutely taboo in the culture, in the time and place of Jesus. So, maybe this morning I'm going to step out of my lane a little bit too. We live in a time where Christian nationalists and other folks preach versions of Christianity that are not compatible with our understanding of the reign of God as Jesus preached. They distort Scripture to fit dogma rather than building dogma based on an informed, honest, and deep conversation with Scripture. Christian nationalists insert themselves into politics, attempting to shape policy for everyone based on a misreading of Scripture, which marginalizes people, even declares people evil, based on things like their gender, their race, their sexual identity, their gender identity, or their political affiliation. We Episcopalians are nice people. It is not our nature to discuss or argue about such things, except perhaps in polite and refined academic ways. It is uncomfortable for some of us to hear such things from the pulpit, I think. But if the reign of God, which has been consistently preached from this pulpit, matters, based on love and affirmation, maybe it's time to be a little bit louder. We have the example of the prophet Amos, an ordinary guy from an ordinary place, finding his voice to challenge powerful people engaging in atrocities. None of this is to say that stepping out of one's lane, no matter how consistent that is with the teaching and example of Jesus, is free or easy. In last week's reading from Amos, Amaziah, the priest and the professional prophet, and Jeroboam, the king, tell Amos to get out of town and stay in his land. That's pretty mild compared to what was done to other prophets. And we all know what happened to Jesus when he refused to shut up and disappear. When the prophet Amos stepped out of his lane, he stepped into real danger. Tradition says that he was tortured and martyred. No matter how loud I may get standing here, I'm not stepping into any real danger. The worst thing that could possibly happen to me is not being asked to preach it. But there are people in our country, some of them our neighbors, who today put themselves into very real danger just by stepping out of their doors. perhaps for those of us who can step out of our front door, who don't really risk that much to speak up, today it is our lane, our calling, our responsibility to speak on behalf of those being told, often in the name of a misguided Christianity, to stay in their lane.